Good afternoon, adventurers. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome if you are new. I know it's been a hot minute for those who've been here before, and I am trying to upload more frequently, more regularly. Stay tuned. I will do better, hopefully. Anyway, today, I want to talk about Armor of Agathys. This is such a cool spell, and one that I know I'm not the first to make a build video about, but I really like it, so I'm going to do it anyway. Plus, I really want to get into details of things like the Abjurer's Ward. We'll get there, don't worry. But first, I want to touch on the Fiend Warlock, because Armor of Agathys is a Warlock spell, and it's something that they can do natively. When we get Armor of Agathys at level 1, we can cast it to give ourselves 5 temporary hit points. When a creature hits us, they take 5 cold damage. As long as those hit points last, the spell continues, and as long as we have any temporary hit points, the spell continues. And at level 3, Fiend Warlocks get a feature called Dark One's Blessing, where when we kill an enemy, or one dies within 10 feet of us regardless of who kills it, we get temporary hit points equal to our Charisma modifier plus our Warlock level. Meaning, if someone hits us and takes Armor of Agathys damage and dies, we get temp HP back. How cool is that? Technically, this might not work if the damage we take reduces the temp HP to 0 and either leaves us at full normal HP or cuts into our normal hit points. Then technically we will have run out of temporary hit points and the spell will end, unless you have a nice DM that lets them sort of roll in there anyway. I don't think that's necessarily raw, but it's such a fine interaction that I could see it going either way for sure. And of course, by level 3, when we get that subclass, we're casting Armor of Agathys for 10 temporary hit points, 10 points of cold damage, so that's already better to begin with as well. And of course, as we level up, keep getting higher level spell slots, the temporary hit points and damage go up, making it more likely that we're going to survive the first couple of attacks and get into the range where we can start getting temp HP back from Dark One's Blessing, and keep the cycle rolling. For reference, a fully level 20 Warlock with 20 Charisma gets 25 temporary hit points back from Dark One's Blessing, which is how many we start with a 5th level Armor of Agathys, the highest level a Warlock can cast, right? Because their 6th through 9th level spells aren't spell slots. They can't upcast with those Mystic Arcanums. Mystic Arcana? Whatever it's pronounced. Meaning that any hit we take, if it kills the enemy, will immediately refresh the full amount of Armor of Agathys' temporary hit points. How rad is that? And if that cold damage doesn't kill a creature, then hopefully their next attack against us will do them in, or maybe we'll just have to kill them the old-fashioned way with magic or weapons. Oh no. But Warlocks do come with that weakness that their spell slots only go up to 5th level. So, Armor of Agathys damage is a little limited by that fact. We can push it way farther. The Abjuration Wizard, or Abjurer, Rural Juror, has a feature called Arcane Ward that protects our hit points and our temporary hit points from taking damage by having its own pool of HP. That means, when it's active, it takes the damage first whenever we would get hurt. It triggers whenever we take damage and doesn't require a reaction or any other involvement from us. So that rules. It can work on multiple hits across the same round because of that. Good stuff. It even inherits our resistances and technically vulnerabilities, so hopefully you don't have any of those. It doesn't say that it inherits our immunities as well, and there's a reason for that. The ward specifically takes the place of our damage when we take damage. If we have a damage immunity, we're not taking damage, so the ward doesn't have to get involved. Just wanted to mention that up front in case there were any questions. Now, the ward gets HP back when we cast Abjuration spells using spell slots. In 2014, that last little bit wasn't in the rules, so any Abjuration spell we cast would apply HP to the ward. For example, Armor of Shadows, the Warlock Invocation, gave us at-will mage armor, only on ourselves, but we could cast it as many times as we want, giving the ward 2 HP back each time. That's no longer an option. The level 18 wizard feature that lets us cast A first and a second level spell at will without a spell slot, no longer an option. The spell has to spend a spell slot in order to give the ward hit points back. Which is fine. It's still plenty of extra defense on top of our already hit points and temporary hit points. We're going to be plenty tanky, but it was nice to have that to fall back on. Across the Player's Handbook 2024, Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and maybe a few from other books here and there, but no third-party content from what I was looking at, there are 62 Abjuration spells. I'm going to start with the ones on the Wizard spell list, as most of the build I'm about to get into will be Wizard, so I want to call those out specifically, and then I will list the other ones too, just in case you want to do some Armor of Agathys shenanigans of your own, or at least Arcane Ward shenanigans of your own. For Wizards, Absorb Elements, from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, Alarm, Mage Armor, Protection from Evil and Good, Shield, Snare, I'm going to stop counting on my hands because I don't have that many fingers, Arcane Lock, Arcane Vigor, Counterspell, Dispel Magic, Glyph of Warding, Magic Circle, Non-Detection, Protection from Energy, Remove Curse, Banishment, Mordenkainen's Private Sanctum, Odaluk's Resilient Sphere, Circle of Power, Planar Binding, Contingency, Globe of Invulnerability, Guards and Wards, Symbol, Anti-Magic Field, Mind Blank, Imprisonment, Invulnerability, from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and Prismatic Wall are all Abjuration spells and all of the Abjuration spells that Wizards have access to. That is 29 out of the total 62, so almost half. That's pretty good. And there are many ways of getting other spells, so I figure I'll list the other ones regardless. Armor of Agathys itself is an Abjuration spell. Ceremony, Cure Wounds, Healing Word, Sanctuary, Shield of Faith, Aid, Lesser Restoration, Pass Without Trace, Prayer of Healing, Protection from Poison, Warding Bond, Aura of Vitality, Beacon of Hope, Intellect Fortress, Mass Healing Word, Aura of Life, Aura of Purity, Death Ward, Freedom of Movement, Gate Seal, Anti-Life Shell, Dispel Evil and Good, Greater Restoration, Hallow, Mass Cure Wounds, Druid Grove, Fizban's Platinum Shield, Forbiddance, Heal, Primordial Ward, Holy Aura, and Mass Heal are all Abjuration spells. They made all the healing spells Abjuration spells, which is super nice. If we wanted to take Magic Initiate or something and get our hands on Cure Wounds or Healing Word, for example, we could heal ourselves and also the Arcane Ward at the same time. I think that's super cool. These spells add 2 per spell level to our Arcane Ward if it has taken any damage, so between 2 and 18 points depending on the level. If we somehow use all of our spell slots on Abjuration spells, remembering that our first slot gives us the ward in the first place for the full amount of its hit points, how many hit points can the ward have over an adventuring day? That's a random question that probably won't come up that often, that I want to answer anyway. A level 20 full caster has 89 levels of spell slots. -1 for our initial ward activation when we cast Mage Armor or something like that at the beginning of our adventuring day, plus 10 from Arcane Recovery, because we're a wizard. 98 total levels, multiplied by 2, of course, plus the initial 45 that we have, right, double our wizard level plus intelligence modifier, gives us a grand total of 241 ward hit points. That also assumes that we're not over-healing the ward by casting a spell that's too high level for it to recharge fully, or for it to recharge fully but waste points doing so. That's a better way to say that. And all of that sits on top of our own hit points and the temporary hit points we have from Armor of Agathys or from other sources. So we are going to be one tanky wizard. The problem with that math is that it's kind of gonna be stupid to only cast Abjuration spells for a couple of reasons. One, there aren't any that do damage. Technically, Prismatic Wall does damage, and that's an Abjuration spell, but it's also 9th level, so not worth worrying about for the first 16 levels of our character's adventuring career. And there are plenty of gems in the list, do not get me wrong, but we're also going to want to cast spells that draw aggro to us, so that enemies want to hit us and break our concentration, or that just do exceptional things in combat, like Fireball is the obvious example. It does tons of damage. Just cast Fireball. or Wall of Stone, or something like that, Wall of Force. So realistically, we aren't going to burn through the entire 241 potential hit points that the ward could have. It's going to be a bit less than that, but it should still be a nice chunk overall throughout the day. What's important is that we use the ward to mitigate the damage to our temp HP from Armor of Agathys, and to our real HP so we don't die. There is one slight trick we might be able to use. It's a little bit unclear in the rules as written. At level 10, Abjuration Wizards get a feature where we always have Dispel Magic and Counterspell prepared. Dispel Magic also gets a couple buffs. We can cast it as a bonus action, and we get to add our proficiency bonus to its roll to dispel a spell. The feature also makes these two spells not spend their spell slot if they fail to stop the magic. If we counterspell someone, but they succeed on their Constitution saving throw, we keep the spell slot. If we cast Dispel Magic, but we fail the roll to dispel the higher level spell, we'd keep the spell slot. Now, the question is whether that still counts as casting a spell with a spell slot, even though the slot doesn't end up being expended. That I am unclear on. If it works that way, if it counts because we were trying to spend a spell slot on the spell, then we could ostensibly increase the ward by a few extra points by failing to cast that. We could fail counterspell our own cantrips, for example. I can't speak to design intent as I am not a designer, but I feel like it would have been very easy to put a line in there that says, and your Arcane Ward isn't refilled by this casting, or something, considering it is an Abjuration feature, specifically. But, as per usual, talk to your DM before trying to whip out a trick like this at the table, and make sure that you're on the same page, whether it's allowed or not. It would also take a really weird build to actually pull off, which we could do with, for example, a Headband of Intellect that we take off so that our spell DC is low, cast a cantrip, and then counterspell ourselves. Maybe that would work. I'm not saying it's a good idea, but it might work. It's also worth noting that we can use a bonus action anytime to burn a spell slot and get 2 times that spell slot's level back on our ward, even though we don't get the added effects of actually casting a spell in that case. It is a bonus action, which is very nice, and in a pinch, it could be very useful to just recharge that thing real fast and still do something with our action, which could be casting an Abjuration spell and refilling the ward even more. Or cast a fireball, or something. In any case, enough about the Arcane Ward, let's talk about damage reduction. That is, when we take damage, actually reducing the amount of damage we take before the ward even has to absorb it. Goliaths with the Stone Giant variant get a feature called Stone's Endurance that is very good for this, where we can use a reaction to roll a d12 at our Constitution modifier and reduce the damage we take by that much. That does use our reaction, so it's only once per round, but it is a very good damage reduction once per round. Goliaths are also resistant to cold damage, and any damage resistance will help quite a bit. To give another example, Aasimar are resistant to necrotic and radiant damage, and there are plenty of other species in the game that have 1, maybe occasionally 2 damage resistances as well. There are also the Shatter Kai, which get a feature that lets them teleport a handful of times per day, equal to the proficiency bonus, as per usual. And when they do so, starting at level 3, they get resistance to all damage until the start of their next turn, so that is also a very strong option. The Psy Warrior comes to mind as well with its Protective Field feature. It works much the same as Stone's Endurance does, but instead we roll a d6 and add our Intelligence modifier, which should be pretty good if we're a wizard. That is also usable a static amount of times per long rest depending on our fighter level, which is a little harder to swing if we want our Abjuration Ward to be high and have lots of spells and spell slots to do wizard stuff with. There's a cantrip called Resistance that lets us choose a damage type and for the next minute, requiring concentration, whenever we or the creature we cast it on takes damage of that type, we can reduce it by 1d4. Not a huge reduction maybe, but it is a cantrip. It is absolutely free. Heavy Armor Master, I don't think applies to the ward. If anyone has a credible source to correct me on that, please tell me in the comments. I want to know. But as far as I can tell, since the ward is taking damage for us and specifies that it inherits things like resistances, but doesn't specify other reductions apply, I don't think Heavy Armor Master works. That said, it can still help defend our temporary hit points from Armor of Agathys, and our normal hit points, helping us not become deceased. It also means we have to wear heavy armor, which is fine, but we actually want our AC to be pretty low because we want creatures hitting us and taking cold damage. The lowest AC we can get from heavy armor is 14 with ring mail. That's already not super high, so that's probably fine. If we want to drive it even further down, if we fight oozes or rust monsters, they have attacks that can degrade our armor permanently, meaning that they get a -1 to their armor class forever. There are ways to fix that, of course, but we could simply opt to not do that. Now, those attacks also specify that if the AC of the armor is reduced all the way to 10, the armor disintegrates, deteriorates, is no longer usable at all. So we got to keep it at 11, but 11's pretty low, so that should be good. As for the spell Armor of Agathys, we can grab that from a background, actually. Of course, we could use a level of Warlock to grab it, as any first level spell could be grabbed with a little bit of multiclassing, but the background Rune Carver from Bigby Presents Glory of the Giants gives us the Rune Shaper feat, which can give us Comprehend Languages, which is always nice, and another spell of our choosing off of a big old list, one of which is Armor of Agathys. And as our proficiency bonus goes up, specifically at levels 9 and 17, we can take another spell off that list as well, which is nice, but it's just gravy at this point. We have what we need. So here's what I'm thinking for the build. This is the build part of the video. Segue. We're going to start with Stone Goliath, like I was talking about earlier, and grab that Stone's Endurance feature. That's going to be huge for helping us block big hits and not take too much damage. Hopefully not so much damage that our Armor of Agathys temporary hit points drop. We're going to start with Fighter 1, original, I know, for heavy armor proficiency, and the other armors as well as martial weapon proficiency, which we probably won't use very much. And we're going to start with that Rune Carver background. If your table isn't using the backgrounds from Bigby Presents Glory of the Giants, that's okay. We're just going to take a level of Warlock after the level of Fighter. Take Eldritch Mind as your invocation. I will explain why more in a minute, but it's an easy enough fix. We're going to start with 17 Intelligence, 15 Constitution, mostly for saving throws. Our hit points hopefully shouldn't be terribly important, since we're going to have our normal hit points, temporary hit points, and then also the Arcane Ward from Abjuration Wizard on top of that. We're going to have 3 health bars on this character. So, shouldn't need too many hit points, but we want those con saves to be high regardless. We'll start with 14 Dexterity, mostly to fulfill the requirement for multiclassing with Fighter, but also saving throws are useful and the skills associated with Dexterity are useful, so not a bad thing to have overall. We could go Strength instead, but considering we want our AC not to be too terribly high, we can ignore Strength in general, because Ring Mail, the lowest AC heavy armor, does not have a Strength requirement. We could also leave Dexterity at 13 instead of 14, but I like even numbers, what can I say? That leaves enough point-by points to have either a 12 and 2 8s in the remaining 3 ability scores, or 2 10s and 1 8. So just pick whatever you feel is best for the character that you're trying to roleplay. I'm going to go with these stats over here, but you certainly can adjust those as you like. If your group doesn't allow the Rune Carver background and the Rune Shaper feat, it's a pretty easy fix. Just go ahead and take a level of Warlock after Fighter, and grab the Eldritch Mind invocation. I'll get more into why in a minute. And drop Intelligence down to 16, and raise Charisma up to 13. Don't love the odd numbers like I just said, but it's the easiest fix. Over the next 3 levels, we're going to take Wizard. We get from that Wizard spells, we get the ability to cast as rituals, we get slots to cast Armor of Agathys, and our other spells, of course, including 2nd level slots for 10 temporary hit points, 10 cold damage. Love to see it. We get Arcane Recovery, so we get even slightly more spell slots per day, and we get the Abjuration subclass at level 3, Wizard level 3, character level 4, and the Arcane Ward it comes with, that has its own HP and protects us from damage. At level 5, Wizard 4, we can take Warcaster, our first feat, which gives us advantage on saving throws to maintain concentration. That is why I said if you were going the warlock route, we can take Eldritch Mind to also get advantage on our concentration saving throws. And then at this level, we can take +2 intelligence instead of Warcaster giving +1. Either way, we end up at 18 intelligence. That's our goal for level 4 mostly. Concentrating on spells is going to be hugely important for 2 reasons. One, we need to make sure enemies want to hit us. That's going to come in more a little bit at slightly later levels when we have some real devastating control magic to cast, but even right away when we get the feat, having advantage is already going to be super useful. And 2, the goal of the build is to get hit a lot, so that Armor of Agathys deals a lot of damage. So obviously we're going to be making a lot of saving throws to maintain concentration, and we want to make sure those go well. At levels 6 through 8, we continue in Wizard, and here's where we start getting the real impactful control magic. Things like Hypnotic Pattern, things like Banishment, things like Slow. Spells that will force the enemy to attack us or leave a potentially significant portion of their force completely unable to do very much, if anything, against our party. Again, the goal is to get the stuffing beat out of us, so we want to make sure the enemies want to do that more than they want to beat up our allies. Banishment in particular is especially good for this because, as an Abjuration spell, it will also help us restore hit points to our Arcane Ward. So if we're down a few points, we can cast Banishment, get 8 or more hit points back on the ward, right, because it's a 4th level spell, and also goad enemies into attacking us so that their boss can come back from a demi-plane or whatever. And of course, upcasting the spell gets us more targets and more ward HP. If we want, we can also cast Stone Skin, which still requires concentration, but does give us resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. It does cost 100 gold pieces every time we cast it, but up in the higher parts of Tier 2, that shouldn't be too much as long as we use it a bit sparingly. Keep in mind the Arcane Ward and our temporary hit points both benefit from our resistances, so having resistance to all 3 physical damage types in a lot of fights, as long as we're not fighting too many casters and elementalist types, we should be able to have the incoming damage quite a bit. At level 9, Wizard level 8, we can grab our second feat, which is going to be, of course, Heavy Armor Master, giving us our 16th point of Constitution, and reducing damage we take from bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage by an amount equal to our proficiency bonus, which, since we're character level 9, is now +4. So every time we get hit by those damage types, we simply take that much less damage. I mentioned earlier in the video, but I'll reiterate real quick, I don't think that applies to the ward. Talk to your DM. Either way, great for protecting our temporary hit points and our normal hit points as well. At character levels 10 and 11, we can grab 2 more levels of Wizard and grab some very cool spells like Wall of Force, Hold Monster, Steel Wind Strike, Synaptic Static, and Big B's Hand, giving us even more potential for battlefield control and aggroing the enemies onto ourselves. We also get a cool feature at level 10 where we get Counterspell and Dispel Magic permanently prepared for us. We can cast Dispel Magic as a bonus action, and we get to add our proficiency bonus to its roll. Both spells also aren't spent if we fail to cancel the magic that those spells attempt to cancel. I already talked about that feature and the things we can do with it, so I'll leave that there for now. I want to talk for a moment about taking more fighter levels. If we feel, and this is going to vary by campaign, that Stone's Endurance isn't holding up, that we keep running out of uses at inopportune times, aka ever, and we feel like we need more damage reduction reactions, we can take 2 more levels of fighter, grab Psy Warrior subclass, and grab the Protective Field feature from that. If we feel like Stone's Endurance is doing totally fine, or that if we feel that Stone's Endurance is holding up completely okay, and or if we feel like we don't often have our reaction free to do that sort of thing, and Protective Field would be a bit redundant, we can actually just leave Fighter at level 1. That's totally fine as well. That's going to be something we gotta kind of feel out for ourselves in play. I can't prescribe what's going to be best necessarily in a video. And as we're feeling that out, we can take those 2 levels of Fighter really at any time. We'll just slow down the Wizard progression a little bit, which can be a little painful early in the build at lower levels, because we want those hard-hitting control spells, and we want higher level Armor of Agathys, and we want more points in our ward. We always gotta do a little bit of a balancing act there. But after level 11 or so, we can really take those fighter levels at any time. Other than those things, we can pretty much just keep going in Wizard, and keep taking cool spells that we like and casting them, especially concentration spells to get enemies to attack us, that whole thing. Tasha's Otherworldly Guise gives us 2 damage immunities for its duration. Incredible in the right fights. At the highest levels, we can even take the Invulnerability spell, which is 9th level, but it does give us 10 minutes of full immunity to all damage, which means if things hit us in melee, they take the full Armor of Agathys damage and nothing bad happens to us at all. It does cost 500 gold each time we cast it, but at high levels, that's not probably going to matter at all. And we could just cast things like Meteor Swarm or Wish, but as long as we're building for a thing, we might as well lean hard into it. Plus, there's nothing saying we can't just prepare multiple 9th level spells and pick which one best suits the boss fight or wherever. Aside from spells, at level 14, we also get advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects, and resistance to the damage from spells. Some spellcasters now have features and attacks that they can use that aren't themselves actually spells, like mages can do a Force Blast, for example, but when a spell is cast at us, it's still useful to have resistance to that damage. Especially considering at high levels we tend to fight a lot of liches and stuff that do cast a lot of spells, and having resistance to a Meteor Swarm is never a bad thing to have in your back pocket. We do want to make sure our last 2 levels are Wizard levels if we're going Wizard 17 Fighter 3, because we want that level 16 ability score increase to be at character level 19 so that we can get an epic boon. If we do get an epic boon feat, we should get the boon of the Night Spirit. That says that when we're in dim light or darkness, we have resistance to all damage except for radiant and psychic. That is 11 damage types that we just have resistance to, which means also the ward has resistance. I'm sure I don't need to keep saying that, but I'm going to. Now, I usually try to make these builds without leaning too heavily into magic items, because I don't know what's going to show up in your campaign, or if your DM is going to make items available to you in a shop sort of setting, or other means to have agency in getting your own magic items. So I simply don't know, so I don't usually get into it too much, but there are some that I do want to call out for this build specifically. We're going to want to guard our hit points and various health bars against spells and against ranged attacks, because neither of those, technically a melee spell attack will proc Armor of Agathys' damage, but a ranged one won't. So if we get something like a Spellguard Shield, that gives us advantage to saving throws against spells and other magical effects, similar to the level 14 feature, but we could ostensibly get one much earlier. The Mantle of Spell Resistance will also do that. The Spellguard Shield, though, also gives enemies disadvantage on their attack rolls with spells against us, which is nice if something's casting like a Firebolt or what have you. A Shield of Missile Attraction, or a shield with the Orb of the Stein rune emblazoned on it from Storm King's Thunder. Those items both give resistance to the damage from ranged weapon attacks, specifically attacks made with ranged weapons like bows and crossbows and slings. Very, very useful because our AC is not going to be super high at any point. Any items that give damage resistances or immunities are going to be very good as well, of course. Rings of Resistance in the 2024 rules don't even require attunement anymore, so technically we could collect a bunch of those if our DM is brave and foolish enough to give them to us in large quantities. We could also get our hands on things like Ifriti Chain, Periaptive Proof Against Poison, Armor of Invulnerability, or a Ring of Fire Elemental Command. Those items give immunities to various damage types. Now, I know some people watching this are going to want numbers, so let's dive into it. With 16 Constitution, we'll end up with 147 hit points. Not terrible for a wizard. We also have lots of temporary hit points from Armor of Agathys or various other spells that we use to replenish those, perhaps exceed them. Spells like Tensor's Transformation or Polymorph. So those are harder to enumerate, but it should be a pretty healthy layer, and if they run out, we just cast Armor of Agathys or other spells again and replenish a whole bunch of them at once. It's safe to assume we're going to start fights with as many as 40 temporary hit points with an 8th level Armor of Agathys, right? Could go as high as 45. but it's hard to justify a 9th level spell slot just for that. Our Arcane Ward will sit on top of all of that with 39 hit points of its own, and be replenished, of course, every time we use that bonus action and spend a spell slot or cast a spell of the Abjuration School, so that will also be constantly going up and down throughout an adventuring day. Altogether, that's a total of 226 points that we can reasonably expect to walk into a battle with, 226 points that we'll need to take before dropping unconscious. It's also hard to work into the numbers, but Heavy Armor Master should also help mitigate some of that damage once the ward is gone. A lot of damage may be halved by resistance if we are taking damage of certain types, especially from spells or with the Boon of the Night Spirit active at high levels. So it would take roughly 452 points of damage to actually bring us down. More if we have a chance to cast spells in the middle of that and it doesn't all happen in one round. All the while, we're dealing cold damage a few dozen at a time to anything that smacks us, casting powerful control spells to weaken the enemy side of the battlefield, and daring enemies to hit us instead of our allies to undo those harsh effects. Or we'll die immediately. Time will tell. And that is the whole gist. That is the whole thing. I really like Armor of Agathys. I think it's a super cool spell, and I have been wanting to make a build for it and really dive in and see what I can work with there, since even long before the 2024 rules came out. Glad I finally got around to it, and I'm glad Armor of Agathys even got buffed in the new version. It's now a bonus action, and we can replace the temp HP, and those things are both super duper useful. I'm looking forward to playing this character more. I did actually start a character that's built around Armor of Agathys back in the 2014 rules, but I'm looking forward to getting back into it with his rebuilt version and seeing what I can accomplish getting my face beat in. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you watched through to the end, I appreciate you. If you didn't watch through the end, you're not seeing this, but I appreciate you anyway. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and make a Thorns build, and I will see you in the next one. Shouldn't be as long a delay this time. I guess we'll see how mental health plays out. Remember that D&D is for everybody, and have fun adventuring in the rest of 2025. It is already almost October. I don't know how that happened. Anyway, bye.